That's quite a tall stone. A broken 30-foot stone has been found about a mile away from the site. Now, that's traditional with these old megalithic sites. They always seem to leave a much bigger stone in a place a mile or so away, almost so that you can see where the hell they got all the stones from in the first place. There's more than 40 stones have been excavated so far, so that's 40 of these stones. And they know from a geomagnetic survey that there are 250 more yet to be removed. And they're covered in carvings of boar and lobsters, ducks, geese, flamingos, snakes, all manner of things. This is a caiman, it's like a little mini crocodile, and what it's doing is it's carved crawling down the side of one of these. You can also see there's little mud brick inserts and stuff in between these various things. And see how they rise out of the ground as well. They're not necessarily flat like our stone circles, not necessarily intended as a henge to observe the stars, almost certainly intended for something else. Even though the place is filled with domestic infill and stuff, there's no evidence of any activity apart from the actual place itself, which is, again, quite surprising. This structures, like I say, are surrounded by those brick niches and stuff, but it's infilled. Oh right, this is a new one. This has turned up on the internet quite recently, and what this is a plan. Here's the ones they've dug up so far, okay, and you can see that there's another one here and another one there, and then they disappear over the horizon here. And all of those are thought to be more of these. It is an absolutely massive complex. And the really strange thing is that during the shift to agriculture, which is what we're going to be looking at, Göbekli Tepe was buried. I mean deliberately, not in a mudslide. The earth we are removing here was put by man himself. All of these hills are artificial. You get a really good picture of one of their curvilinear structures there. Now, that was known because there's a little bit of organic matter adhering to some of the stones. We know that it was buried 10,000 years before Christ. Okay, 10,000 years BC. Now, presumably it took some time to build as well. We've got no idea when it was built. Or who built it or who buried it. It's an amazing thing to try and bury. I mean, quite apart from anything else, where did they get all of this stuff to bury something that big? It's 400 standing stones. Also, currently, the current oldest megalithic site on planet Earth is in Malta, and it's 3,500 years old. So this was buried 6,500 years before our currently acknowledged oldest megalithic site. I'm sure we're going to find, people are still digging there luckily, and that's not something that can be dug up and dragged away and hidden. So it's going to be interesting to see what else happens at Domney. They're still working there. But one way or the other, you kind of get used to the fact, as you look at all these old people, that they move on. It says, though the landscape is now arid and almost without vegetation, from plant and animal remains, it's clear that this was once a rich environment with a warmer, wetter climate, and with meadows, woods, many species of mammal, and huge herds of game. And now it looks pretty much like our countryside, doesn't it? Yeah, sort of fields and brown and all of that. And all of that has moved on. And again, we need to just recognise this fact. We need to recognise that the past, however big and however spectacular, whatever stunts it manages to pull off, it is always giving up and swapping things for the future. People are always moving on. I'd love to know more about the people who did this, because they are a complete mystery. It's a stone artefact with no artist, really. So that's where Göbekli Tepe is. It's down right near a place called Haran, which is interesting. That's where Abraham's father went to live. When he moved out of Ur, he went to Haran. The next place we're going to is a place called Çatalhöyük. This was occupied for almost 1,000 years, from 7,300 BC. The mound is 3,500 feet above sea level on the bed of a lake formed more than 1.5 million years ago when dinosaurs were still around. One of the interesting features of the households here is that some of them had exquisitely carved bull's heads, which they buried in the walls of their houses for reasons that we don't really know. If you imagine a small town built on a vast plain, high on a plateau, surrounded by marshy and uncultivatable land, and largely without raw materials, then you've got Çatalhöyük down to the T. It looks a bit like a toffee town. See how it's set up on a real swampy islet. This is something our ancestors seemed to like to do, set themselves up in places that were difficult to get chap. There's no roads and paths here at all. All access is gained from the roofs, as you can see from here. And what's happened here is the place gets taller as people live longer on the site, for reasons that will become apparent. There's evidence here of just slight mixtures of domesticated and wild plants and animals. So there's evidence 7,000 years ago that they were starting to farm. So it was kind of in the consciousness of humankind. They possibly were connected with the south of Iraq, which is where all of our farming animals and grasses arose. But they seem to have been doing it just a little bit before. In fact, if you look at the history of Anatolia, look at the history of Turkey, you'll find that all the stuff that famously exploded in Iraq as civilization, a lot of it was being experimented with in Turkey and the Mediterranean first. And these would be one of the earliest guys doing it. The walls of the houses are very thin, and although they're close to each other, they didn't actually touch. The houses are all of variable height to let a bit of air and light in. And there's archaeologists over there now building models of this place and trying to live in it to see how it all worked. And it's about this time, like I say, about 7,000 BC, that the domestication of animals was starting to happen in the Fertile Crescent. When they finally got around to digging out Châtel Hayuk, they found 13 layers of occupation debris, several hundred houses, and the richest cache of Neolithic artefacts that has ever been found in the Mediterranean. And this was the same thing. If something was found on the top that was really old, and somebody had the good sense to take a spade to it, once again, to have somewhere this sophisticated and this, this long-lived, there must have been other places around, but we don't bother taking a spade to it to find out. There must be lots of other places like this. And you can see how they originally started living almost in a hole in the ground and then grew out of it. And all of the houses are built on top of each other, one after the other.
Was that because it was cold? Underneath?
I'm not sure. It seems to be the way they did things here. What happens is they live in the house for 70 or 80 or 100 years, and then they deliberately sort of pull down the roof supports, collapse the roof, collapse the top levels of the walls, pack it all down, and then build the new house on top of the old house. And then every now and then, they'll actually dig down through several generations to remove one of the modelled bull's heads from the walls of the house, and they'll bring it up and they'll put it into the wall of a new house, even though they didn't do it a couple of times before. So it's completely mysterious. And the other thing about this place is this place was microscopically clean. When we say that, they went through the dust of all the floors. They couldn't find any evidence in most of these houses of what the hell was going on there.
Does the bull's head tie to the kind of Taurus age?
Highly likely. That's highly likely. Part of the thing of precession is that, of course, if we're going into Aquarius from Pisces, before that we had Aries, before that we had Taurus. That's why it's thought that you get to see bull temples, and you do get the ram as well arising in kind of things, and that may well be, may well have been that they were in an age of Taurus, or that's what they were remembering. Quite a remarkable place. A lot of the places we're going to go to at this time are still, nearly everywhere on Earth, as far as we can gather, at this time was still only little plots of land with maybe 70 or 80 or 100 people living on them. This was a major concern, and like I said, it came as a real surprise when they found it. And although they can't find a lot of evidence of what was going on in each of the individual houses, we do find evidence across the site of the usual ancient things: basketry, bead making, blade crafting from stone, bone and obsidian. But the evidence is really slight. These people, unlike the guys at Donny Vescovich, they must have had some sort of compulsive disorder or something that just kept the place really squeaky clean. There's no evidence of temples, shrines, administrative buildings or centralised authority. Hurrah! So they were running quite a successful egalitarian business without anybody being any bigger than anybody else. You can already see all the houses are pretty similar to each other. You have a little staircase that comes up through the roof. Under the staircase is your cooking thing, presumably able to keep the place warm, and the smoke can disappear through the hole of the roof. There's a kind of socialising room, a storeroom and a bedroom. And pretty much all of them were like that. There were slight differences in them, in that some of them had got dead people buried in the floors and some of them hadn't. We don't know what they did with the rest of the dead people. And some of them had a lot of artwork on the walls, and the artwork is really quite bizarre. Wild and mystical images, vultures hovering like birds over headless corpses, and women reclining with leopards. So obviously it wasn't quite as calm and laid back looking as it appears. It's quite strange though that like many of the places I'm talking about, although they say there's all this artwork and all these artefacts found there, you try finding any pictures of them. It's really difficult. A lot of it's just disappeared, it seems, just been sort of swept away. So there you have a place 7,500 years ago. The mother goddess cult is still going, and there you see a particularly terrifying rendition of her. This is her some sort of, you know, what, it must have been 12, 13, 15,000 years down the line from Dolney, and she doesn't she look like she's wearing a spacesuit. Just completely, you wouldn't want to mess with that on Friday night, would you? And it's thought that here you've got a bull and a ram on the throne, and they're masculine and feminine, and they're also thought to be the last two ages. This is a baby that's just dropped to the floor between her legs, showing that she is a mother goddess. And here are some strange things that were found. One of the things that was found at Chathalhire is a human skull that has been remodelled after death, and they kind of put shells in the eyes and paint them with red and blue, and they remodel the nose, and I think they do something to the mouth as well. And a couple of these were found in Chathalhire, and as far as I know, they've only ever, these three are from Jericho, where we're going to go shortly. So there's some sort of connection between Chathalhire and Jericho to do with modelled skulls that have then painted blue and red, and we don't know anything about that connection or what those skulls are for, although again they're probably an echo of the old skull cult beliefs. Here's a couple of views of what Chathalhire looked like when it was at the brushing edge of archaeology. What fun it must have been to go in there and find all this stuff. And this is what it looks like now. Several of I haven't been to any of these places. As you've noticed, I kind of nick the pictures, but my friends, I've got friends who've been to Chathalhire, and I went, great, give me some photos, and they said it's just a mud pit. So we don't always have the ability to kind of protect these places once we've dug them up. It now does have some protected areas in it, Chathalhire, and in Egypt and stuff, they can obviously dig it out and let it all fill with sand again. They can dig it out, photograph it and all of that, and it then fills with sand and it just stays the same. But in places like this, quite often once the stuff is dug up and removed from the site's left to go to waste, unfortunately. Anyway, all of the places we visited so far have been occupied for a while by quite a number of really inventive human beings who've been doing a lot of interesting stuff for quite a long time, and then they've not been occupied anymore. We just see these people arising and falling away and arising and falling away. It's going to change a little bit as we move into other places, because now we're going to start looking at places that have been occupied over a very long space of time. Certainly the oldest sites of human habitation are in what we call the Holy Land, up in Israel and the Lebanon. And there's a fair amount of argument as to which is the oldest, but I've chosen to go for Jericho as my kind of local example, if you like, of the ancient stuff here. One of the reasons I've gone for Jericho is it's kind of down here by the Red Sea, and up on the mountains above it is Jerusalem. And in Jerusalem there is a site called the Dome of the Rock, which is known to have been a sacred site since 8,500 years before Christ. And underneath it there's a whole lot of interesting stuff. But we know a lot more about Jericho than we do about Jerusalem, interestingly. Jericho was first occupied kind of 14,000 years ago. I'm sort of cheating a bit there, but there were people doing semi-settled stuff and pottery on the site of Jericho 14,000 years before Christ. And they were called the Tufians, these guys were, and they're thought to have been the people who first domesticated dogs. The remains of the oldest domesticated dog have been found in the Tufian graves from 11,000 BC. So that's how long we've been having chuck with dogs. 5,000 years before we started getting together with cows and sheep. Actually, funnily enough, I've just read an article recently which seems to be suggesting that humans might have been having chuck with dogs for 400,000 years on some sort of genetic level. I'm going to have a look at that. I just read it recently, so that'll block it a long, long way back. Anyway, Jericho, probably the oldest continuously occupied settlement on Earth. By 12,000 BC, there was a permanent settlement here with evidence of early burials, stone tools and things like that. And evidence of a sedentary as opposed to a nomadic lifestyle. This is how farming starts coming about. We start seeing pottery. We know people are settling down when they make pottery, and I think that's as if they were still moving the pottery and kept getting broken. So you know they're setting up home. And the pottery always develops as well. It starts simple and it gets more and more beautiful. So that's a sign of people looking better to do with their time.